they've recovered.
And it's a very strong faction. So we're going to go right now to that presidential candidate forum and see where the candidates stand on Great Lakes issues.
Polls that demonstrated that fact. The Healing Our Waters Great Lakes Coalition is also nonpartisan, but that doesn't mean that we have to ignore the fact that a presidential election is taking place. So just as we did 4 years ago, the Healing Our Waters Coalition invited the campaigns of both presidential candidates to participate in this conference through a candidate forum. The campaigns were each invited to send a representative to the forum to explain their candidates' views on the Great Lakes and the issues that face the lakes. The coalition since then has had multiple contacts with both campaigns about the event, which is right now. We have sent both campaigns the identical materials, including ground rules, logistics, and a briefing memo providing the coalition's viewpoint on key Great Lakes issues. In other words, we have been and will continue to be scrupulously nonpartisan as we put on this event. The Obama campaign has sent Ms. Browner, who I will introduce in a moment, to be its representative. The Romney campaign is not sending a representative. Let me go over the ground rules that we provided to both campaigns. We will follow the same ground rules and logistics and ask the questions in the same way we told the candidates' campaigns we would, even though the circumstances are different than we believed they would be. And we thank, again, Ms. Browner for being here and agreeing to be part of this forum under these changed circumstances. The purpose of the forum is for 30 million Americans who rely on the Great Lakes and their leaders to learn where the presidential candidates stand on Great Lakes issues. Ms. Browner will have the opportunity to explain her candidates' views generally on the Great Lakes and then answer specific questions on Great Lakes issues from the moderator, that would be me, and the audience. Audience questions will be written on cards and turned in to Healing Our Waters staff. You've already turned in some questions, and Chad, if you want to wave back there, other questions or turn your cards back into Chad. He will look at those cards. Because of time limitations, we may not be able to answer all the questions that audience members turn in. We will not ask questions that are off topic or too specialized for any candidate representative to answer. The candidate representative is asked to focus her comments on Great Lakes issues. Here's the format. Ms. Browner will have up to 10 minutes to present her candidate's position regarding Great Lakes issues. I'll ask Ms. Browner 2 to 3 questions about President Obama's positions on Great Lakes issues of concern to the region. She'll have up to 3 minutes to answer each question. I may ask brief follow-up questions, and she'll have 2 minutes to answer each of those. Then I'll read questions or cards submitted by the audience and the candidate, and she'll have 2 minutes to answer each one of those. And of course, Ms. Browner may make a closing statement up to 3 minutes, and then the forum will conclude. As I said, we are following the same ground rules we would have had both candidates sent a representative here, even though the circumstances are different than we believed they would be. Now, I'd like to introduce Ms. Browner. And then Ms. Browner is a senior counselor at Albright Stonebridge Group and a distinguished senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. Ms. Browner also serves on the board of the League of Conservation Voters and on Bloomberg Government's Advisory Board. Ms. Browner most recently served as Assistant to President Obama and Director of the White House Office of Energy and Climate Change Policy, where she oversaw the coordination of environmental, energy, climate, transport, and related policy across the federal government. From 1993 through 2001, Ms. Browner served as the Administrator of the EPA. From 1991 through 1993, Ms. Browner served as the Secretary of Environmental Regulation in Florida. Again, thank you for joining us, Ms. Browner. And now we're going to that should be on.
Okay. Good morning. And thank you all for the opportunity to be here, and thank you for what you do in your communities, in your state, in your businesses, in your organizations to help protect and make sure everything possible is done for the Great Lakes. As you heard, I am here today. My title, I think, is surrogate for the Obama campaign. As you heard in the introduction, I've had a lot of titles in my life. There was Secretary of the Environment for the state of Florida. When I went to get a mortgage on a house in Florida, the woman whose title was also Secretary processing the loan guarantee, wanted to know how I made so much money as a secretary. She clearly didn't understand that I had 700 employees and a lot of laws to enforce. Then I went to the White House, most recently, where my title was assistant to the president. That's the highest rank office in the White House. But the press decided to title me the Socialist Czarina, leaving you to wonder what they didn't understand about history. I don't think there were any actual socialist czars in our history, in the history of the world. But I have to say my favorite title was the title administrator. Again, no one really understood what an administrator is, but the opportunity to work with the 15,000 plus people that make up the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, to be a part of implementing this country's environmental laws was really a true honor, and I continue to this day to be very proud of the progress we were able to make during my tenure at EPA. It's great to see Dave Ulrich here, who was one of the regional administrators during my tenure. And certainly I am proud of the work that EPA did during that time and continues to do today on behalf of the Great Lakes. As you know, this is a candidate forum or a debate. I'm not sure what it is now, but I'm here to talk about the President Obama, and his commitment to the Great Lakes. I think the best way to judge somebody is to look at their record, to look at what they've actually done over a period of time. And I think the president's record is really quite significant. He understands that the Great Lakes are home to some of America's finest beaches, world-class fisheries, and some of the world's most popular tourist destinations. That the Great Lakes supply drinking water for 30 million people, and that there is a robust industry depending on the health of the Great Lakes. He also understands that the stewardship and the health of the Great Lakes is intrinsically linked to environmental sustainability, human health, national prosperity, and security. And that's why he's taken the steps that he has taken. I probably don't need to tell all of you what those steps are, but I think it's worth just briefly mentioning a few. The first is the historic investments, the financial investments in the Great Lake restoration. More than $1 billion since the president took office. Thank you. Obviously, there is the focus on the carp, on the Asian carp, and there he has been funding those efforts to better understand how we can actually deal with that problem, how we can prevent the spread of the Asian carp. He's also taken actions outside of the precise focus of the Great Lakes that are important to the health of the Great Lakes, and perhaps most significant among those is the work that Administrator Jackson, Lisa Jackson at EPA, did to set the mercury air pollution standard. We all understand that the mercury comes out of the smokestacks, it falls into our rivers, lakes, and streams, into our fish, and can become a serious issue for public health. And I think the administration, and particularly Administrator Jackson, deserves a huge amount of credit for the leadership she took in setting the first ever national mercury standard for coal-fired power plants. You know, as we look to the future, as we look past the election, clearly the president will continue to provide important leadership. As you all are keenly aware, he has already asked that the study in terms of how best to manage the Asian carp be expedited. The Army Corps of Engineers is working to do that. That will provide some very, very important insights in terms of next steps to be taken to build on the steps that have been taken. So again, I'm really here, I guess, now to answer your questions. And I appreciate that opportunity on behalf of the Obama-Biden campaign. And again, I appreciate everything you do. Let me just make a personal note in closing. I'm from Florida, as you heard, and I suspect what is true for me is true for all of you. One of the reasons I committed my life to environmental protection and have worked in this field since I left law school was because of a special place that inspired me, and that was the National Everglades Park, a beautiful place that is threatened daily. And I suspect for many of you, the Great Lakes has similarly inspired your commitment to the environment, and it is those most beautiful places that continues, I think, to inspire people to think about how we go about protecting our environment, how we protect the health of our children, the health of our communities. You know, the environment is not just a pretty place we visit on our vacation, it's where we live our lives and how we live our lives. And so thank you for your commitment to the environment.
Thank you, Ms. Browner. I've got a few questions to ask now, and then we have a few from the audience. The first question comes with a bit of a preamble. The Great Lakes are one of America's most precious natural resources. They provide drinking water for more than 30 million people, more than 1.5 million jobs in the region, and recreational opportunities for the nation. Here in Ohio, Lake Erie is especially important to the quality of life for millions of folks who live near the lake. Yet Lake Erie and the other Great Lakes are suffering.
We have a bit of a problem. They can probably hear you
But
quite
you
well,
can't.
but I can't.
Okay.
So I don't know how we're going to fix this, because I think when the sound is coming back at me, it's garbled.
Why don't I move to the
You'll
center?
just hand me the questions? And no, I'm kidding. I'll pick the ones I want to answer.
Here we go. Is this any better?
That is better.
All right. You know what? I can do that right like this. I will talk at you rather than them. How's that?
I think it's the way it's coming through the sound system. So when you spoke closer to the mic,
Okay.
it was a little bit better.
So you don't want to answer questions that you can't hear?
No, I'm happy to answer questions I can't hear. I'll just say what I want.
I can live with that. Okay. Yet Lake Erie and the other Great Lakes suffer serious threats such as toxic pollution, sewage pollution, invasive species and habitat loss that have led to much damage, illnesses in people, algal blooms, record beach closings, fish consumption warnings, and billions of dollars of economic damage. In response, citizens, agencies, and governments from across the region and the nation developed a comprehensive restoration plan, and then both parties have taken action to implement it and fund it through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. Here's the question part, if re-elected president, will President Obama maintain, decrease, or increase the current funding levels for Great Lakes restoration funding in his budget?
Well, again, I think, oh, wow, now I hear myself quite loud. I think what we need to look at is the president's record here. It is a strong record. Obviously, we're about to have a big debate in Washington post-election, whether that's in the November, December, January, February timeframe remains to be seen about budget and balancing our budget and deficits and things like that. But the president has a very strong record, and I think it is very fair to assume he will continue this commitment. He will continue to build on it. I think it's important to understand that the opponents in this election, Mr. Romney and Mr. Ryan, the only sort of budget they have out there is Mr. Ryan's budget, which would cut programs across the board a significant percent. And as far as I know, I'm not aware of any promise or commitment they've made specifically on this program. But the president does understand the importance of the Great Lakes. He is from this region, and I think has provided really important leadership and will continue to provide that leadership.
If I can ask a follow-up, we heard earlier in this conference about the fiscal cliff that's facing the nation at the end of this year. We were told it was sequestration, the annual budget, and lifting the debt ceiling. Given those pressures, will President Obama be able to protect Great Lakes funding?
Well, the president each year in his budget thus far has protected and sought money for Great Lakes restoration. Obviously, this is going to be a very difficult conversation that the country is going to engage in. But I think it's fair to say when you look at his record, his commitment has been very, very strong. How this issue gets resolved and how individual cuts or broad cuts are managed will be different depending on who wins this election. I mean, you know, people like to say elections matter. When it comes to an issue like this, elections really matter. And the president has a demonstrated record on these issues.
Thank you. My next question, at least, again, a bit of a preamble, and I'll stand close to the mic so you can hear it. One of the most pressing threats to the health of the Great Lakes is the monstrous non-native Asian carp, the invasive species of fish that breed like mosquitoes and eat like hogs. I have to call out Jeff Alexander for providing that phrase, which has now made it nationally all over the place.
Wait, say it again. I have to learn this.
You need to hear, this is the invasive species of fish that breed like mosquitoes and eat like hogs.
I don't know a lot about hogs being from Florida, but I know a lot about mosquitoes, so I get it.
Despite various government efforts, these fish have used the Chicago canals as a kind of invasive superhighway, traveling from the Mississippi River through the canals to within several miles of Lake Michigan. At the same time, those canals are carrying other invasive species like zebra mussels from the Great Lakes to the rest of the country. If elected president, what will President Obama do to effectively and permanently stop the advance of Asian carp?
Well, the president will build on the work that he's already done, which I think is quite noteworthy. He has demonstrated a commitment to maintaining, to restoring a healthy ecosystem. Obviously, Asian carp are not a part of a healthy ecosystem. He's established the Asian Carp Regional Coordinating Committee. He's appointed an individual within the White House in CEQ to oversee the activities that the administration is undertaking with respect to the Asian carp. He has provided funding that had not been previously funded, and as I mentioned earlier, he has asked that the Army Corps of Engineers and the other federal agencies involved in the current study expedite that study so that we can get those results and make some additional decisions going forward.
Thank you. I've got one follow-up question for that too, which I know you know is coming. It involves the term hydrologic separation. And specifically, we have to ask whether the president will order various government agencies to take the necessary measures to construct a permanent barrier to separate hydrologically the Mississippi River and the Great Lakes Basin in Chicago.
Well, I mean, as you all know, that is part of what is now being looked at, and it wouldn't be appropriate for anybody to prejudge the outcome. You know, one of the things I learned running the largest environmental agency in the country is that you want to make your decisions based on the best available information, based on the best available science. And so that process is underway right now. I have the utmost confidence that the president will take the results of that process very, very seriously. But it's not, the president, I think, said this yesterday in an interview, obviously on a different issue, that, you know, when you're in office, you have to take very seriously the requirements of the office and the way in which you use your authority, and you have to comply with the law and all of its intents. You know, when you're not in office, you're free to sort of say whatever you want. In this case, the president is taking the issue seriously. He's ordered the study, he's ordered it expedited, and he needs to allow the results of that study to come forward so that we can all make an informed decision about how best to proceed. You know, I mean, I'll just add an aside. You know, there were lots of times during my tenure at EPA when I might have personally wanted to do something, but as the statutory head of the agency, as someone, you know, confirmed by the United States Senate, nominated by a president, confirmed by the Senate, you're not free to do that. You must follow the laws of the country, and those laws are important, and they're how we've been able to make the kind of progress we've made in terms of environmental protection, clean water, clean air in this country. And so, you know, it's easier probably to be a candidate in an election season, or a candidate not currently in office, than it is to be a candidate in office. But the president does take his responsibilities towards the Great Lakes very seriously.
Great. So we are now going to audience questions. How will your administration promote the growth of green jobs and industry in the United States that will develop technologies that can be applied to Great Lakes restoration and protection in the future?
Well, I think that The administration has already demonstrated a willingness to do two things that are important to technological advancements in terms of protecting the Great Lakes writ large. One is obviously the investment of federal dollars, and whether that be in the form of particular initiatives around the Asian carp, whether it be funding for the Great Lake issues more broadly, whether it be funding for things like new technologies so that our cars are more efficient and less polluting. You know, the administration has been willing to put a fair amount of resources into the funding of new, greener technologies. The second thing an administration can do, and I already mentioned, is set standards. And when you set, for example, a mercury standard, what that does is it creates opportunities for new technologies to come forward. For those businesses, for those smokestacks that emit mercury, they have a choice now. They can shut that facility down, or they can install new, greener, cleaner technology to reduce their pollution. And, you know, a lot of times you'll hear folks say, well, regulations are just bad for the economy. I can show you any number of businesses that exist today because the government created an environmental requirement and they had the solution, and with that governmental requirement to reduce pollution, that company was able to come forward and sell their technology. And so I think that, you know, we need to continue to be take advantage of all of the tools that are available to the government in terms of stimulating private sector investments in new technologies and really bringing to bear the very best of our country in terms of common sense, cost-effective solutions.
Thanks. We've got another one that's about the public investment now. Infrastructure across our country, bridges, roads, water, and sewer lines are in terrible shape. Many older cities, especially those bordering our Great Lakes, were built with combined sewers. The cost to reduce combined sewer overflows, or CSOs, is staggering. The price tag here in Northeast Ohio is $3 billion, paid mostly by the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District ratepayers. What can the federal government do to lessen this financial burden on Ohioans, yet protect our waterways from sewage discharges?
So I think it's important to understand that the federal government has been funding the construction of wastewater treatment facilities, initially through grants going back, I want to say 30 years ago, more recently through the revolving loan program, probably for the last 20 years. So what happens is every year money flows from the federal government, from the EPA, to each state based on your population. States are then free to use that money to build wastewater treatment facilities. One of the changes I got in the law is you can use that money to prevent pollution from entering your waterways. We also created a drinking water revolving loan problem. What many states have done, I don't happen to know Ohio, is they take those federal dollars and they multiply them through a bond program. So they leverage it. So, you know, for every dollar they get from the feds, they're able to turn it into $2, $3, $4, which they can then loan to local governments to allow them the capital they need to improve the quality of the sewer system, of that drinking water system, and then that loan is paid back. Now here's what's important. It's paid back to the state government, not to the federal government, and then that money can be relent. And so the wastewater revolving loan fund is now revolving nationally at billions of dollars. And, you know, just even with that level of revolving funds, there continue to be monies flowing, new monies flowing into the state accounts. And as I mentioned, a similar fund was, we were able to create while I was at EPA with the support of Congress for drinking water. And so, yes, infrastructure is a serious problem. Yes, there are dollars, there continue to be dollars, but, you know, this is the kind of debate we're about to have in Washington, is what will those levels of funding be going forward?
Thank you. We have time for one more question. And here it is, your favorite topic. Climate change is a serious threat to the health of the Great Lakes and the people who rely on them. What is the President's plan to address climate change in his next term?
Can we just start with what the President said about climate change in his acceptance speech? I mean, you know, he said, look, this is real, this is serious. We need to be about doing something. He said earlier in a State of the Union, he said, you may not believe what I, the President, believe about climate change. Even if you don't, there are still reasons to invest in clean energy technologies. Now, the president does believe climate change is real. I believe it's real. I believe it's probably the biggest, most difficult issue our generation faces. The president has already taken significant steps to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The mercury rule that I mentioned, the requirement to reduce mercury from coal-fired power plants, the effect of that mercury requirement is also to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. He's been working through the Department of Energy so that when you go to buy an appliance in the next couple of years, it will be significantly more efficient than the appliance you're creating, further reducing greenhouse gases. And finally, the car rule. One of the things I was able to be a part of during my tenure at the White House was bringing together two agencies, the EPA, the Department of Transportation, all of the car companies, the state of California, who can set their own fuel efficiency standards. And not only did we create a national program for fuel efficiency and the most stringent efficiency standards ever, but we also set the first ever greenhouse gas emission standards for cars. And the administration late this summer, went even further, setting another round. So if you look at how the president is using his existing authorities, maybe he didn't get the legislation he wanted, he has been taking real and measurable steps that are not only good for the environment, not only reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but are good for consumers. The fuel efficiency car rules will save people who buy a new car money every single time they fill up at the pump. Obviously, in the second administration, the president will have other authorities that he can bring to bear. He's proposed the first ever greenhouse gas requirements for new coal-fired power plants. But I think that for those of us who believe climate change is the issue of our generation, this president has a very, very solid record to build on in a second administration.
That concludes our questions. Ms. Browner, would you like, you've been talking for a while, but do we want to say anything to wrap us up?
You know, I would. You know, I ran the EPA, and one of the reasons we created an EPA, an Environmental Protection Agency, in this country was in part a response to what was happening across the nation in terms of pollution, and obviously for the photos, the sort of iconic photos of the Cuyahoga River catching on fire was certainly something that compelled a lot of people to demand that the then President Richard Nixon create this federal agency. And the reason I bring up what I'm sure for people who are actually here from Cleveland, a somewhat painful memory, is on the drive-in, the gentleman driving me, a lovely man, is a rower, it turns out. And there's a regatta here this weekend in the Cuyahoga River. And I thought, what a testament to what our commitment to environmental protection can mean. And you know, we've made a lot of progress in protecting our air and water, but the job isn't done. And in a modern industrial world, we have to remain committed and vigilant. And there is no doubt in my mind that that's what President Obama stands for. But as he said in his acceptance speech at the Democratic Convention, he can't do it alone. He needs all of us to help him. And so let me end where I began by thanking you for what it is you do as committed environmental leaders, but not only for what you have done, but for what you will do, so that we can give to subsequent generations clean air, clean water, and a restored Great Lakes. Thank you all so much. Thank you. So now I have to sit here for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Ms. Browner.
And you've been watching the Presidential Candidate Forum here at Great Lakes Week on the last day of the conference. And joining me now is Gary Wilson, commentator from the Great Lakes Echo. Very interesting. This Presidential Candidates Forum was supposed to be a representative from the Obama administration and a representative from the Romney campaign. And it really seemed like at the last minute, I know that there was some last minute wrangling, the Romney campaign did not send anyone. What does this say, or is it really pretty much say volumes about their stance on Great Lakes issues, or do you give them the benefit of the doubt that there was some kind of logistical issue?
I'm no benefit of the doubt on this one. You know, at conferences like this, a lot of things go on. There are a lot of events and policy discussions and seminars. There's rarely a wow event. Oh my gosh, this this happened. You know, if this conference had a wow event, this was it. I thought for sure that the Romney campaign would send somebody. And I don't know if it speaks volumes by them not sending somebody, but I think it was a big mistake. Nobody can say what a new president or the existing president is going to do, but here in Ohio and in the Great Lakes region, not to just send somebody to at least express their concern. There's a message there, and I think they made a mistake.
Carol Browner, former head of the EPA, was the one who was just speaking right now with Andy Buxbaum, representing the Obama administration. She was pretty much preaching to the room that liked her.
Yes, and she is. I said off camera. I said she's playing with house money. She doesn't have an opponent, so she was able to really bring home a message. They sent a high-ranking person. They didn't send some unknown staffer to carry the message, and I think there's a message in that too. She was well received.
Did she answer the questions to the best of? She answered them the best of her ability. That's not what I'm saying. Did she give you enough, do you think?
Well, she took a little bit of license. The moderator, Andy Buxbaum, asked her about the clean water funds and how much, and she kind of took us through the path of how that's funded. What she didn't say was due to the budget cuts that we've been talking about for the last few days, there was a significant cut in that, I think about $500 million that a lot of the environmental folks have been fighting to get reinstated. So she kind of sidestepped that one, but it is what it is.
Really, can candidates make blanket promises that yes, when they get into office, I guarantee I'm going to give you $300 million for Great Lakes restoration, even though the Obama administration has been giving each year, and through Congress they've been voting to keep up the Great Lake Restoration Initiative. They can't promise what they're able to do.
No, they can't, and I thought she handled that very well. What you have to look at is the track record of the person, in this case the president, and president's track records cut both ways. Whatever they did is quantifiable, so you can see. So then you kind of measure the character of the person and say, well, what are they likely to do? Is he likely to do a 180? No, I don't think so. Now, he has to deal with Congress, and who knows what that will be. The House of Representatives is on a mission to cut money. The budget that they've proposed for next year already cuts Great Lakes restoration money by $50 million. We'll see how that plays out as it gets to the Senate. But no, the president can't promise. A candidate can't promise because they don't have the ability to deliver.
Healing Our Waters Coalition did a survey, did a poll earlier on in May, and that's what I was searching for on my computer. I was listening to you, but I'm like, wait a minute, I want to get a hold of these numbers. That a large majority of Ohio voters, 72% of them, support continuing Great Lakes restoration funding rather than reducing that. And that is a significant amount, and also that the support is bipartisan, that 63% of Republicans voted to keep that restoration funding, and of course 79% of Democrats, 72% of independents. So this isn't really a partisan issue when you're living along the basin, that you want to make sure that the funding is available, especially now looking at Lake Erie and the issues that they're talking about in terms of algae blooms and the phosphate runoff, and how are you going to stop that, and what kind of money do you have to put into that for programs and enforcement to make sure that that cuts back? Well,
Christy, you brought up something that's very relevant to this point a day or so ago. Sure, if you ask people, do you support clean water? Do you want
everybody says yes,
yeah,
sure.
Do you want the beaches free of algae? All those types of things. And then you start putting a price tag to it, and you say, okay, we can do this, and it's going to cost this much. Now that's the hard question. I don't know if that was part of the survey, but I forget at what point you had brought up the other day. Well, how much are you willing to pay for this? Well, maybe not, maybe this much, but maybe not that much. That's the test.
And they do have some numbers on that, but you're right, it does change. It does change a little bit. 37% say the government needs to focus on the creating jobs, that that's where the money needs to go, reducing the federal budget deficit, and that the Great Lakes should take a cut along with everything else. But 54% said no, That's clean drinking water. That's the important thing, and we need to make sure that that funding stays up there. But you're right, there is a little bit of change when push comes to shove and people say, look, is it something that's going to affect me right now or something happening somewhere along the Great Lakes Basin? I might go for something that's happening right in my backyard.
And that goes back to the discussion we've been having with, you've interviewed a number of people about the physical separation of the Great Lakes from the Mississippi along the Chicago waterway system, and the two numbers, $4 and $7 billion. Next year, when push comes to shove, we're going to find out if people have the stomach to put up that kind of money to do that.
And a massive change of infrastructure, and it's a great segue because Carol Browner did talk a little bit about Asian carp and about the physical separation. Andy Bucksbaum did ask her about where the Obama administration stands, and she said that they need to wait for all the studies to come in, and that's what we've been talking about. The Army Corps of Engineers has to finish their study.
They finished their study, they'll present it to Congress, and who knows what will happen there. It's going to get a robust debate. The folks here are going to make sure of that, and I just don't know how it's going to play out. I could argue it both ways. I interviewed Peter Annan a few years ago, author of Great Lakes Water Wars, one of the great books about the region. And it just so happened we were on the banks of the Chicago River. And at the end, as a toss-away question, I kind of said, Peter, do you ever think that the Chicago River will be reversed? And he kind of looked at me like, He said, that's a lot of money, and I just don't see it in the future. Well, a few years later, we don't know if it's going to happen or not, but it's being talked about, and it's being talked about by serious people.
It is being talked about, and it's turning into a debate. People are starting to kind of line up on the sides of it because of the fact that it is getting closer to what could be reality. So let's go ahead and take a look at the question of hydrological separation between Lake Michigan and the Mississippi River Basin and potentially keeping out the Asian carp. Here on the Illinois River, about 30 miles south of Chicago, is ground zero of the latest invasive species debate, whether or not to spend untold billions of dollars separating the Great Lakes from the Mississippi River Basin.
We're approaching the electric barriers that have been in place since 2002.
Del Wilkins operates a barge business on the Illinois.
The fish barriers are working, and that the controls were being adequate at thus far and doing their function to stop the advancement of invasive species, not only from the inland waterways coming into the Great Lakes environment, but also from the Great Lakes environment going into the inland waterways.
Frankly, having that technology in place doesn't make me sleep better at night. It's a good interim solution. It does a good job of repelling fish, but we need something in the Great Lakes that we can bank on for generations to come. And I'm banking on the separation of the Great Lakes from the Mississippi River.
Debate over building a physical barrier which would interrupt commercial barge traffic started mainly because of this. Asian carp, the frenetic flying poster fish for all invasive species, on a seeming quest to scare anyone who encounters them out of their wits, if not their boats.
They're a real danger. These are big fish. These are oftentimes 60-pound fish, and there have been some scary and unfortunate instances where they've hit people, broken bones, knocked people unconscious.
As dangerous and scary as Asian carp can be above the water surface, they're even more devastating beneath it.
Underneath the water, Asian carp are great at eating. They can scoop up to 20% of their body weight out of the water per day, and what they do is they eat right at the base of the food web.
It's the fear of Asian carp's next destination that has galvanized advocates for separation.
They're swimming north towards the Great Lakes through the Mississippi River, the Illinois River, and they're coming very close to us here in Chicago.
And it is in Chicago where the proponents of separation would like this fish story to take a sharp turn, literally at the convergence of the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River.
Used to be that water flowed from the Chicago area into Lake Michigan. At around the turn of the 20th century, around 1900, the water was reversed, so that now Lake Michigan drains into the Chicago River down to the Mississippi.
At the time, the reversal of the Chicago River, still considered one of the greatest engineering feats in American history, was necessary for a very good reason.
To protect the drinking water supply for the city of Chicago. It used to be that their waste was all flushed into Lake Michigan. Well, they wanted to separate their waste from their drinking water for obvious health reasons, and so the river was reversed.
So now you've got this free-flowing canal between the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River. Great for getting rid of Chicago's waste, great for transportation in the 19th century, but it's also opened up this highway for Asian carp to move up the Illinois River toward Lake Michigan.
So the idea is to build a permanent barrier to separate, to restore the natural divide, the natural watershed divide that existed prior to the 1900s.
For its advocates, the barrier would not only solve the invasive species problem, but also provide an opportunity to focus on improving the Chicago waterway itself.
It is not a modern waterway. It is not a modern transportation system. What we're talking about with this idea of a physical barrier is rethinking Chicago's waterway, modernizing it.
Increased property values, clean water, better recreation, more people on the river, and yes, grow commercial transportation in a way that makes sense for Illinois and Chicago.
We always need people who want to look forward, and there's absolutely no reason for us not to do so.
Kay Nelson represents an array of industries in the state of Indiana and has been engaged in Great Lakes issues for over 30 years.
My concern is that I've expressed multiple times in settings is that the general public has the impression that this is the fast fix to prevent the Asian carp from migrating into the Great Lakes. And it's not something that's going to happen within the next 18 to 24 months.
And other critical factors need to be considered before any barrier can become a reality, such as now dumping the treated wastewater and the combined sewer overflow discharges back into Lake Michigan, where Chicago residents get their drinking water. Meanwhile, Del Wilkins and thousands of others who work along the Chicago waterway are focused on making a living right now.
If we shut down locks or we separate a system, we're forced to have to shut down our operations. Because if we shut down operations, we're putting people out of work and we're losing jobs. We move coal, petroleum products, chemical industry products, road salt, ice control salt, sand, gravels, cement, steel, and steel byproducts. And right now we're moving upwards of 25 to 30 million tons annually within the greater Chicagoland area.
There's $16 billion worth of product that goes through the waterway system.
Mark Beal represents the chemical industry in Illinois and is also chairman of Unlock Our Jobs, a group focused on keeping the Chicago waterway system open.
The folks who depend on the waterway system don't want the Asian carp in the Great Lakes. That's the last thing in the world we want. We want to be part of the solution. What we have said is we think there's a lot of ways to solve this issue short of separating the waterway system so that you cause economic harm to those folks that depend on it.
I think everybody wants to be part of the solution, but it's going to come down of what part of the solution is going to be best for them. And there are many people that don't believe that you have to go all the way to that separation, that there can be different kind of barriers to be put up. But you have a large chorus of people saying hydrological separation is the only way to keep Asian carp out.
Yeah, this was an interesting segment that I'm glad to see it. What you had there, really the two extremes of the issue. Joe Brameyer and Josh Morganman representing Joel with the Alliance for the Great Lakes and Josh with the Natural Resources Defense Council representing the environmental group position, and then Kay Nelson from Northwest Indiana Business Group and Mark Beal representing the chemical industry. They're at the opposite end of this spectrum representing industry. And they really don't have a lot. I follow this all the time in Chicago. Mm-hmm. They don't have a lot of common ground. And they're really talking past each other. And then you've got Del Wilkins representing the barge industry. He's kind of really caught in the middle. That's his livelihood. That's what he does. So these are tough questions. And boy, if I could just put them all in the room and say, guys, no talking points allowed. Get in there and just talk about some things about how we do this. Yeah.
It's interesting. I would say that people are more educated about the Asian carp issue, or they know that there's a problem coming. They may not know all the specifics, or how it would decimate fishing and other wildlife in the Great Lakes Basin. But it feels in terms of environmental issues, which sometimes the general public is not totally keyed on, right, that there has been a lot of discussion about this for years, and people now are waiting and saying, okay, well, where's the end game here? And we won't maybe see it for another year and a half?
At the earliest.
At the earliest.
We are coming up now, approaching 3 years since the eDNA samples were found beyond the electrical barrier. And here we are 3 years later, and we're kind of no closer to a solution, if there is one, than we were then. And that was, that made headlines. I can tell you in Chicago, every station carried some version of that story for a week. You don't get the TV stations in any major city picking up on an environmental story unless it's some type of a major disaster.
Right.
You get 2.5 minutes, if that.
That's just sometimes how local news goes,
yeah,
right?
it is. Yeah, you should know that.
Yeah, I do.
So it's the story that's maintained the traction, well beyond what I thought it would be.
Do you think that the pressure now, because of there had been the lawsuits from the various states, from the various attorneys general to try to get the Army Corps to shut down the lock, saying it was a public nuisance? Okay, well that didn't go in the court, and then they tried to get them to move up the study. Finally, Congress did say in July, you've got to get the deadline for this study come out a little bit quicker. And that was just even like 2 months after the Corps themselves said
they were going to do it.
We're going to move up our deadline because there's been a lot of heat on us. Is it going to be quiet now for the next year until the study comes out? I don't think that there can be any more kind of poking and prodding, or if there is some kind of discovery, this thing's going to blow up.
Well, if there's a discovery, then
Then you got
it will
trouble.
blow up. But I don't think it's going to be quiet. These groups are very good, very skilled on both sides at keeping their message out there and keeping the pressure on their politicians, their supporters. The lawsuit is still pending. That's not over yet. Now, as the legal experts I talk to, they say the state of Michigan and the other states, they've got a tough road ahead. And I've been talking with people trying to find out what the state of Michigan's end game is here.
Mm-hmm.
Do they want to win in court, or do they just want to keep the pressure on? And nobody really has an answer for that. You're from Michigan. You can.
I'm going to get a little intel on that.
Yeah.
Does the infighting, or not a lot of it, but do the legal wrangling like this involving the various states, which now seem to be lined up, versus Indiana and Illinois,
Right.
Does this affect how they can all come together on other Great Lakes issues? Will the Asian carp issue fracture the good relationships that the basin has tried to maintain as a whole?
Boy, on two fronts there, I don't think there's a lot of collaboration between the governors when it comes to the economy and jobs. Everybody's trying to pirate companies away from everybody else.
Get for your own, right?
Yeah, on the Asian carp issue, the governors, they're going to keep it pretty close to the vest until they have to really make a commitment. And the can got kicked down the road here till the end of 2013, early 2014, and I don't think they're going to put their chips on the table until they absolutely have to.
Yeah, we'll be watching, and I'm sure we'll still be
Right.
talking about it. Gary Wilson, commentator of the Great Lakes Echo, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I know we'll talk a little bit later on this afternoon as we continue to wrap up Great Lakes Week.
I'll be here.
You've enjoyed, right?
Yeah, I've enjoyed. I'm running on adrenaline here today.
Exactly. It made you sit at the desk for a long time. But we appreciate